On a cold October night in 1916, Martha Ellison disappeared from her small cabin in the North Carolina Appalachians. The wind carried the sound of her last steps across the ridgeline, and by morning the forest had swallowed any trace of her. All that remained was a single lantern, its metal edges blackened, the glass smeared with something that no one could explain. The door to her cabin hung open, swaying slightly with the breeze, as if the house itself had been waiting for someone who would never return. Villagers reported hearing faint calls echoing from the hills, but every search led only to empty hollows, trees clawing at the sky, and shadows that refused to settle. What happened to Martha Ellison that night has never been solved, and the questions it left behind continue to haunt the mountains to this day. If you were standing at her doorstep when the wind whispered through the trees, what would you have done? Comment below before we uncover the events that followed. The North Carolina Appalachians in 1916 were a place where the mountains rose like silent guardians, and the valleys held secrets older than anyone still living. Life moved slowly here, dictated by the rhythm of the seasons, the work of the land, and the traditions passed from one generation to the next. Families like the Ellisons lived quietly, tending small farms, chopping wood for the winter, and relying on neighbors for help when illness or injury struck. Martha Ellison was known to many as diligent and careful, a young woman of 24 who moved through the forests and fields with a quiet determination. She had grown up hearing the stories that elders whispered by the hearth, tales of travelers who wandered too far, of lights in the mountains that appeared without source, and of voices that called from places no one should go. While most dismissed these stories as the ramblings of old folks, some listened with a caution that had kept families safe for generations. The night she disappeared, the mountains were cloaked in mist, the kind that sinks into the hollows and softens every sound. Chickens had gone to roost, lamps were lit in the windows, and the wind moved through the trees like an unseen hand brushing across the hills. To the casual eye, it was just another autumn evening. But for those who knew the Ellisons and the history of the hollow in which they lived, it was a night that would mark the beginning of a story no one would ever forget. Even in daylight, the ridges carried an atmosphere of quiet unease. Neighbors would later speak of the stillness that settled over the land in ways that were difficult to describe, a silence that seemed to watch, waiting for something to happen. And though Martha's family had lived in this area for generations, no one could remember a night quite like that one, until it would be remembered for years to come, in hushed tones and cautious glances toward the forest. Martha's disappearance began quietly, almost imperceptibly, as she stepped out into the chill of the evening. She had been preparing her small cabin for the night, tending to the fire and checking the animals one last time. But when the morning sun rose over the ridges, there was no sign of her. The cabin door was ajar, the hearth cold, and the tools she had used just hours before lay where she had set them, untouched, as if she had vanished mid-task. Neighbors recalled hearing nothing unusual, yet when they ventured closer, they found her lantern lying on the path leading into the woods, its flame long extinguished, the metal darkened with something that no one could identify, the glass smeared with marks that resembled fingerprints, or perhaps something less human. The forest itself seemed to respond to her absence. Birds had fallen silent, and the wind carried only the rustle of fallen leaves along the trail she had walked. Those who dared to follow her last known steps into the forest reported a chilling sensation, as if the trees were pressing in around them. The ground was soft with morning dew, yet there were signs of a struggle. Torn pieces of cloth caught on branches, footprints that ended abruptly on the edge of a ravine, and strange depressions in the mud, too deep and uneven to be made by a single person alone. And yet, there was no scream, no trace of panic, only the quiet evidence left behind, a story told in objects rather than words. When search parties arrived, they scoured every ridge and hollow within miles, calling her name until their voices faded into the distance. But for every clue they discovered, more questions arose. A broken branch here, a scuff of dirt there, a lantern swinging gently in the wind, as if waiting to lead someone further into the hills. By nightfall, the forest had returned to its usual quiet, the kind that can feel heavier when one knows a life has vanished within it. And in the hearts of those who knew Martha, a question hung in the air like smoke. Where had she gone, and would she ever return? Before we continue, consider this. If you had been standing at the edge of that forest, with the mist curling around your feet and the lantern lying at your side, what would you have done next? The search for Martha Ellison began almost immediately, yet the dense forest and jagged ridges of the Appalachians made every step treacherous. Villagers formed search parties, lanterns swinging in the dark, calling her name until their voices cracked from exhaustion. Horses were saddled, dogs were unleashed, and yet no one could trace her steps beyond the edge of the clearing where her cabin stood. At first, the clues were subtle. A scrap of her shawl caught on a low-hanging branch, footprints that vanished into mud and moss, and a lantern, still cold to the touch, resting at the base of an ancient oak. But as the days stretched into weeks, more unsettling discoveries emerged. In one hollow, searchers found a diary belonging to Martha. Its pages were filled with everyday notes, but toward the end, the entries shifted. She wrote of fleeting shadows, of hearing voices in the trees, of lights moving across the ridges at night that no one else could see. The last page ended mid-sentence, as if she had been interrupted, the ink smudged by rain, or perhaps something else. Rumors spread through the village with every passing day. Some claimed to see a figure wandering the ridges at dusk, carrying a lantern that flickered in a way unnatural to flame. Others reported strange sounds, whispers that seemed to come from the earth itself, urging searchers back toward areas they dared not explore. Even those who had lived all their lives in the mountains admitted that the forest felt different, heavier, when Martha's disappearance remained unsolved. Amid the search, peculiar signs appeared. Trees were marked with crude symbols, some resembling letters, others unfamiliar in shape. Footprints were found in pairs, yet their size and depth did not match any human known to the villagers. Some depressions suggested someone had crouched, or perhaps been dragged, though nothing could confirm it. And then, one morning, a searcher reported a discovery near a ridge he had avoided. A bundle wrapped in cloth, containing trinkets that belonged to Martha, but no sign of her body. The diary, the lantern, the footprints, they were pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. The villagers began to whisper questions that had no answers. Had Martha wandered into danger of her own accord? Had the forest claimed her in ways no one could understand? Or was there something else, something moving unseen among the trees that had taken her from them? And here, in the heart of the Appalachians, the story shifted. Those who had initially dismissed the old legends began to see patterns, other disappearances in nearby hollows, lanterns swinging in the wind with no hands to hold them, voices calling at night for people who would never answer. The mystery deepened, and the search for Martha Ellison became more than a quest to find one missing woman. It became a confrontation with the unknown, a challenge to the understanding of the forest itself. Take a moment and imagine it. The wind whipping through the trees, lanterns swaying, shadows shifting just beyond sight. Did you notice the symbol carved into that tree? What could it mean? And why would it appear where Martha was last seen? As the weeks passed, the forest seemed to hold its breath, and the story of Martha Ellison took on a life of its own. Those who searched the ridges began to report strange occurrences, lanterns that flickered in the distance, though no one held them, footsteps that echoed along empty trails, and glimpses of a figure moving just beyond the trees. Some claimed to hear her voice, calling softly for help, always fading before anyone could respond. Folklore, long whispered among the mountain families, began to resurface with urgency. Tales of wandering spirits, of travelers led astray by mysterious lights, and of voices from the forest that promised guidance but delivered only fear, were spoken again in hushed tones. And in the valleys and hollows, every crackle of branches, every rustle of leaves, became a reminder that the mountains were not as empty as they seemed. Neighbors recounted incidents that sent shivers through even the most stoic among them. One farmer swore he saw a woman walking the ridgeline in the dead of night, lantern in hand, her figure blurred by the fog yet unmistakably familiar. A child claimed to hear Martha calling from a grove near the creek, repeating the same line from the diary over and over. "The light. It waits for me." Objects in cabins moved inexplicably, doors creaked open when no one was near, and dogs refused to enter certain parts of the forest, whining and barking at nothing visible. Then came the most unsettling discovery. A traveling minister visiting the hollow spoke of finding a small shrine hidden beneath a fallen tree. The blood-stained lantern, Martha's shawl carefully draped, and a set of symbols carved into the surrounding bark. No one knew who had placed these items there, or why, but the arrangement suggested intent, as if someone, or something, was trying to send a message. What message, and to whom, remained a mystery. With every revelation, the tension escalated. The forest no longer felt like a home to those who had lived among its ridges for generations. It became a place of uncertainty, of questions that could not be answered, and a reminder that Martha Ellison's disappearance was far from ordinary. And yet, even with all these accounts, the most troubling detail remained. The forest seemed to remember her. The lantern, her diary, and the footprints were markers of an event that refused to end. What happened next would change everything, and no one could explain it. To better understand the disappearance of Martha Ellison, experts have examined the case from every angle. Folklorists note that the Appalachians are rich with stories of travelers vanishing, of forest spirits, and wandering lights. These tales often carry warnings, passed down through generations, about the dangers of straying too far from the paths known to the community. Historians point to the region's isolation in the early 20th century. Roads were few, and communities were tightly knit, but separated by steep ridges and dense forest. Disappearances, while rare, were often impossible to investigate fully. Any evidence could easily vanish into the hills, leaving families with only fear and speculation. Martha's case, however, stands out. The objects she left behind, the lantern, the shawl, the diary, provide tangible clues that defy simple explanation. Local law enforcement at the time documented the search extensively. Reports describe footprints that ended abruptly, Objects moved inexplicably, and residents hearing sounds that could not be traced. These accounts were preserved in journals, letters, and local newspapers, but no definitive conclusion was ever reached. Some investigators proposed that she had wandered into a hidden ravine or fallen victim to an accident in the thick terrain. Others suggested that Martha had encountered someone or something that led her away from the forest paths. Patterns emerge when the case is placed in a wider context. Nearby hollows had seen other disappearances over the decades, all marked by unusual signs, items left behind, unexplained lights, and traces of movement that did not fit human logic. While skeptics argue for natural causes or human involvement, the consistency of these details has left the mystery unresolved for more than a century. The experts agree on one point: Martha Ellison's disappearance is not merely a story of a missing person. It is a convergence of history, folklore, and unexplained phenomena. Every clue raises new questions, and every answer seems to lead further into the unknown. The mountains hold their secrets tightly, and even today, they offer no certainty. After more than a century, Martha Ellison remains missing. The lantern she left behind, the diary she never finished, and the footprints that vanished into the forest are the only remnants of a night that changed a community forever. The mountains, with their ridges and hollows, hold the memory of her steps, and perhaps the answer to a question that has never been solved. Even now, visitors to the area report seeing a light moving along the ridges at dusk, or hearing a faint voice calling across the hollow. Some say it is Martha, still wandering, still searching, still carrying that lantern as she moves silently through the mist. Others believe the forest keeps her, unwilling to let her go, or perhaps protecting something that no one should find. The story of Martha Ellison does not end with a body or a confession. It ends in questions that linger, in shadows that stretch longer than the sun, and in a forest that remembers more than any person could. What do you think really happened that night? Could the hollow still be hiding her, or was she taken by something we cannot understand? Comment your theory below, and if you dare, share any stories of the unknown you have encountered in the mountains or the woods near your home. And this is only one of the many forgotten horrors of the Appalachian Mountains. In our next story, we will uncover another tale that has been whispered from generation to generation, waiting to be told once more. But for now, the ridges remain quiet, and Martha Ellison's lantern continues to flicker somewhere in the fog, waiting for the eyes of the curious to catch its light.